Right. Good morning, everybody. We are live. Thanks for joining us this morning. It's going to be one of the first of many cybersecurity focused webinars that we're going to be doing over the next several months. Before we get going, obviously everybody's been in a webinar before. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. Q&A mode is on. We'll have a short Q&A at the end of the session, but feel free to shoot anytime, and we'll get your questions answered. Before we start, just introduce a couple of speakers that we have for today. First and foremost, you may have seen him on here before with us. It's Trace Hester. He's our Director of Business Operations at In-Telecom. Trace, say hi, introduce yourself.
Hey, everyone. It's good to be back. Always happy to talk cybersecurity and what you can do to protect your business, right? Proactive services is important. It's what I do. It's what I live. So I like talking about how to stop things before they happen. So interested to see what we've got today and happy to take questions.
Absolutely. I appreciate you being here. And finally, Jim Peterson with our partner ConnectWise is here. He's going to be sharing some inside information that they've got on proactive cybersecurity. Jim, feel free, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
I appreciate that, Taylor. Hey, everybody, I'm Jim Peterson, Principal Solution Advisor at ConnectWise. If you haven't ConnectWise before, it's not a surprise. We're more of a back-end security provider to technology companies, just trying to help secure the world a little bit. My history is 25 years in technology and security. I'm an ex-MSP owner, so I know what Taylor and Trace have to go through day to day and what you have to go through day to day. So I'm excited to dig into some cybersecurity information.
All right, perfect. Well, Jim, I'll let you take it away and get going. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them over.
All right. Appreciate that, Taylor. Thank you. All right, everybody. So, we use this term cybersecurity a lot, and it's kind of like telling people water's wet anymore. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to get an understanding of is that the cybersecurity landscape is growing and what we need to protect is growing. If we look back a little ways, we would have said, hey, cybersecurity is just protecting our digital assets, right? Our information. But we know that that's growing significantly because of the impact to revenue, to our teams, to our clients, to our vendors. It's growing exponentially on the impact the bad actors are trying to make. So we have to protect in that sphere as well. So we're going to dig into kind of who the bad actors are today, what we need to know about them, what our first step can be, and then some technology, processes, and people skills that we want to see in the industry today. But I'll start off with what we think is an interesting stat. If we look at cybersecurity or cybercrime in today's world, we now know that it is the third largest GDP in the world. If we think of the total cost of cybercrime to the world itself, right? Obviously, USA and China have huge GDPs, but Germany and Japan have pretty big ones as well. And if you combine those together, you get basically to the top cost of cybercrime itself. And we know just year over year, some of the stats here, right? In 2022, we had roughly 3 billion password attacks, and we're up to 30 billion password attacks year over year. So we know that this is growing. We know that the impact is growing, and we just want to make sure we're in a good position going forward to make sure that you're not the next one that has to pay, right? Or be impacted by cybersecurity or cyber challenges. So how do we do that? And if we think of cybersecurity, we want to build that holistic solution. And we always start with a conversation of people, process, and technology. We'll typically talk about it in reverse because we kind of think about it in reverse. Technology is what we buy typically to defend against the bad actors. It's all the software, the acronyms that we use in our space. And we're going to define a few of those acronyms so you don't feel like you have to know them right out of the gate. But it's the technology and software that we implement to try and keep the bad actors out. But equally important to that technology is the process and people. Because when we deploy that technology, it is pristine, it's working great. But if we don't have the process to keep it working great and the processes to make sure we know how to respond to alerts that it's telling us, we really start to fall short. And then obviously at the end of that, we have to have the people to follow the processes to make sure the technology works. And all of this falls under both cybersecurity and data protection, which is just really the ability to recover your data, but also assessments in the vulnerability management side. We used to say assessments were a one-time thing, right? When we would meet, we would run an assessment. And then we would manage that environment and infrastructure over time. So we always knew what was on that network. In today's world, things are getting plugged in and installed all the time if we don't have a mechanism to stop that. So we have to do continual assessments to make sure that we're finding new things that get plugged in and that we're mitigating or minimizing those vulnerabilities by patching or retiring equipment that needs to leave. Now, a couple of definitions that we always want to go through whenever we're talking cybersecurity are attack, event, incident, and breach, because a lot of times these get interchangeably used and they actually mean things, right? And you probably know this already. They mean things in the world today because incident and breaches may have reporting requirements and they may have things that we have to do to defend our employees or our clients. If we were to have that breach, we may have to do things. But at the end of the day, an attack, we have millions of those going on all the time. We're all being attacked, whether it's through email or IP addresses, but the bad actors are trying to get in. Now, if that attack bypasses a layer of technology meant to stop it, it's called an event. Now, events are typically self-healing, meaning the technology or a different technology steps in and corrects the problem, right? Gets everything working in a functional way. So that's an event. Now, if a person has to get involved, we're going to call that an incident. For a person, same thing, right? The attack bypasses a layer of technology, but a person has to remediate the solution. We're going to call that an incident. Now, obviously, B is the bad word, right? Breach means the bad actors actually got to the data. They read it, modified it, deleted, did something to it. And we always want to know the difference between these two because it helps us understand what our true risk is. At the end of the day, if we have an incident, but we don't know if they got to the data, that's a real challenge. So visibility of these definitions, not just the definitions themselves, are so important. Now, if we think of these bad actors, right? So they're doing these things, they get into attack us all the time. There's three real categories that we're most concerned about: internal threats, nation states, and organized crime. And if we threw some numbers on here, I don't think I put them on, but roughly 35% of the time, an attack or an incident is internally based, which is up in 2024 from 2023. So we know that number is growing. And the reason this is so important is because we typically don't watch inside the environment very well. We're so outer focused, right? We're so worried about the bad actors outside of our environment trying to ransom and extort us that we don't always think about that inside threat. But we have to be aware of it because 35% of the time, right, it's an inside issue that we have to deal with. Nation states are really small because they're typically attacking large corporations or other nation states looking for intellectual property or some trade secrets. We know, right, and you probably all know this now, organized crime is our largest adversary at around 65% of all attacks that are out there. And if you don't know this, these are very sophisticated organizations. They have HR departments, they have recruiting firms, they have bonus structures. They are very set and ready to scale if they find an attack that is bypassing people's normal guard or suspicion. They can scale those attacks really well and be very, very effective. We don't want to underestimate how sophisticated these organized crime units are, because they definitely, all of the money that they make is from our mistakes typically. So anything we can do to prevent those mistakes, right, we can impact those organizations and hopefully lower their revenue. And thinking about that, right, how do they get paid? So if we know they're organized crime, they get paid typically in three ways: either a ransom, extortion, or data sale. Now, ransom is just we pay them to return access to our system. They've encrypted our systems typically, and we have to pay them to gain access back. Extortion means we have to pay them not to release our information. They've taken some sensitive data and they're threatening to release it if we don't pay them. And data sale typically has nothing to do with you. They steal very sensitive or very valuable data and they just sell it on the dark web. They're typically the only three ways that these organized crime units get paid. So if we can obviously lower these, we'll be better off, from a country and from a world perspective for sure. Now, we know who they are, we know how they're, getting paid. How do they get in? Now, it won't be surprising that there's two main ways that bad actors get into our environments, right? One is the environment itself. And this is typically going to be hardware or software vulnerabilities that they're able to exploit to access the environment. The second way is the human element. And this is the more common one that we hear of all the time. These are going to be the credential-based accesses, the phishing links that we click, social engineering that gives access to the bad actors into our environment. And in general, this makes up about 68% of the incident and breaches that happen in America. So this used to be 80%, and I guess I'd kind of say it still is 80%, but they've moved one of the categories over to environment. It is still people-based. If we think of misuse of privileges, if we think of misconfigurations, if we think of unpatched systems, things that humans would need to go in to correct, this number is actually very high, but still at 68%. It's something we don't want to ignore, so we want to make sure that human element is as low as possible when we think about the risks in our environments. Now, a little example of these two, environment versus human element. We'll go through a couple of these real quick. First things first, if we look back a few years ago and we had our system still in our office, in our four walls, or maybe in a data center, a lot of times we would expose certain services out to the internet. So when we're traveling, when we're working from home, when we're working from a client location, we can access those services, something like terminal services, and be able still to work like normal. Now, a lot of that has been moved to the cloud or retired, but there's still a lot of things that get put into a business on a day-to-day basis, like camera systems, building automation systems, other solutions like that, that want to go out to the internet so we can access them when we're outside. Well, when we do that, we make those systems visible to bad actors. And simple things like default username and passwords or brute force attacks, if the system's vulnerable to that, make it very easy for these bad actors to gain access to that system. And from there, once they're inside our walls or inside our SaaS application, right, their whole goal is to elevate their access and steal confidential data. If we think of it from the human error side, this is a very common situation that we all run through, right? We're going out of office, and how do we handle that out of office message? Now, I think most of us through security awareness training know not to send an open out of office to everybody who might send us an email, but there's some situations where we might need to do that. And if Mike's going on vacation, he sets that out of office reminder. Well, the bad actor could see that. And one thing we underestimate all the time is the sophistication and the planning and the use of AI that these bad actors can leverage to try to find out when we're most vulnerable. In this example, the bad actor knows to send that attack at 5:30 on a Friday when Mike's getting ready to get on the plane to take a nice vacation. Mike's frustrated. He's just trying to finish up his work so he can get on his vacation. So he follows through with that credential process, giving the bad actor his username, password, and MFA token, which is the real scary part here. So that bad actor now has access to the system, elevates access, and steals the data. Now, looks like it's a very complex system. Both of these look like they're very complex, but they're actually relatively simple from the bad actor's perspective. All they need is that first crack in the system to start exploiting and gaining access to larger and larger systems. And you may say to yourself, I would never fall for that, right? Because I expect a phishing email to look something like this. One of the earlier signs from security awareness training that we all probably did 5 or 6 years ago, we look for the bad email, we look for the poor grammar, we look for the link. And this is what we'd expect. And nobody on this call is going to click this link, right? But this is how they're starting to look today. They're getting very sophisticated, leveraging AI, leveraging a lot of solutions to make sure they're matching email addresses to first names, capturing a lot of data from sites like CVS in this example, right? And it may be TD Ameritrade, it could be Chase. There's a lot of financial ones that do this as well. But at the end of the day, they're trying to use solutions that lower our suspicion. And this is a good example. If you're a client of CVS, which a lot of us are, we may look at this and think, oh, this is great. I'm going to get a little training on their system. So why not click the link? Now, hopefully nobody on this call would do that, but at the end of the day, it's just showing the level of sophistication that's going into the solutions today. It's bypassing people's skepticism. Now, so if we know that the environment is a big piece of the access and the human element is a bigger piece of the access, what are the bad actors doing once they get into the system? So they've attacked, they've gained access. The first thing they're going to do is investigate. They want to understand what's on your network. At the end of the day, if we remember, they only have 3 sources of revenue, right? Ransom, extortion, and data sale. They want to maximize that number. maybe even multiply that number by leveraging 2 of them at the same time. And they're not going to do that if they don't understand the data that they have and the possible data that they can get. So they're going to spend a lot of time understanding your network, even trying to find your cybersecurity liability policy so they understand what the maximums are that they might be able to receive from an insurance company. Spend a lot of time in this area. From there, they're going to try to take the data. At the end of the day, if they have a copy of your data, they have another way to make money from you, right? If they just started their attack and we were able to stop them, if they didn't have the data, they'd be out, right? But if they also have a copy of the data, they can fall back on one of those other revenue models to try and maximize their payout. From there, they want to manipulate the backup system. If they can make it so you can't recover your own environment, they're guaranteed to get paid in most situations. And one of the things that we'll probably bring up a few times is you always want to be in charge of your own restoration. You never want to hand that over to the bad actor. Too many companies think they're protected and come to find out that they're not as protected as they thought they were, and they had to pay the ransom to get back in business. From the backup manipulation, they go to production manipulation. This is when we typically see it, and they throw in that ransom request. Now, we said they spend a lot of time on investigation, but this whole process on average takes 200 days. It's a long time they spend in the environment to maximize that payout. And we're really, really good at seeing the cyber attacks, especially the ones that we stop. And we're unfortunately really, really good at seeing that ransom request when it comes in. But on average, we're not really good at seeing once someone's got into the system, them taking all the steps to gain this access, manipulate the environment, and get to the point where they can request that ransom. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to protect yourself in this specific scenario. It's going to go back to that people, process, and technology. We need technology in place to be the guardian 24/7. We need process to make sure it's working and know how to respond. We need to have that people to follow the processes to make sure you're protected. But first of all, we have to understand the risks to your specific business. We throw out a lot of technology terms in the cybersecurity space. And a lot of times we'll say, hey, here's the stack you need, or here's the solution set that you need, without understanding your business. And that's just a tough way to go, because there are some fundamentals that most businesses should have. But you really have to understand the type of data, the type of organization, how your people work, the size of your organization, to understand the right solution set for you. And it all starts with an assessment, right? We talked a little bit earlier on that assessment side, falling into it. From our perspective, it's up in this upper left-hand corner of the 15 ways to protect your business, because it's the most important. It defines everything else. Understanding what level of security you have, what level of security you need, and what those gaps are, defines the journey that you'll go on to make sure you have the right security solutions for your specific business. By identifying your risk, creating that plan. And the one challenge that we have in this is a lot of times businesses want to run this one time and then assume that it's going to maintain throughout time, right? We need to complete these assessments annually. And the reason is the environment's changing fast. Our businesses are changing fast. We're doing acquisitions, we're being acquired, we're taking on new services, we're taking on new clients, we're taking on new vendors all the time with new SaaS applications. We have to continually assess that environment to understand where the risk has shifted. So as an example, maybe you took on a new ERP application for your business, so you have a new main line of business application that could create or change your risk profile. So your IT team has to shift your solutions and services, maybe add a layer, maybe remove a layer, depending on which solutions you pick. But we have to understand that. So these assessments are really critical to make sure we understand what's going on in your environment to make sure we're putting the right layers together. Now, knowing the risks comes kind of in 4 different flavors. If we think of the type of assessments that most organizations are going to run, kind of mentioned the security assessment earlier, but there's typically 4 types, right? Network security, risk, and vulnerability. And a lot of times these build into each other, but we use these terms a lot in the IT space. And just to give a little definition, so the next time you talk to someone, you understand what you're getting into, right? A network assessment is just going to tell you what's on the network. It's typically the most basic assessment that we would do. You scan the environment, say what's out there, and that's about the extent of it, right? When we move up to security, we're going to say, well, let's not just look at the solution or the systems that are out there. Let's look at the security that's in place and what a system, what that company should need, so we can actually provide some gap information. From there, we add levels of risk based on your type of business, your type of, or how your company's working. At the end of the day, how many employees you have, what systems you have, so that we can identify not just the security gaps, but the risks that tie to that. And then last is that vulnerability. And that's going to be a very deep scan of everything on the network to find every vulnerability that you have so that it can be patched or mitigated or maybe even retired to increase the security of your environment. All right, so we know assessments are the first step. Then we get to the process, people, process, and technology. And we'll start with that technology. We set a stack or a solution set, defense in depth. We use a lot of different terms in the IT space to define what we're about to show you. At the end of the day, it's just a couple different pieces of software that back each other up. It's the simplest way to say it. If we think of why we do this layered approach is all of these solutions, any solution we put in place has some sort of deficiency. There may be some sort of area where it's just not as strong as we want it to be. And I'll pick on security awareness training as an example, because with the human element being such a large percentage of the reason bad actors get in, if I get that fake email on Friday at 5:30 and I'm tired and I'm getting ready to go on vacation and I click the link, I need something to back me up to make sure that we protect the organization. So that's where my DNS and web filtering may come in and say, I'm not letting you go to that website. I'm not letting you receive that payload from the internet. It's going to monitor that traffic to help back me up. And that's the whole point of the layered approach, is we always need layers in there so that we have things backing us up based on our business needs. And it typically ends with business continuity or disaster recovery. Now, we used to call this backup system years ago, right? But it's gotten a little bit larger because we not only have to back up and restore, but we have to make sure that it fits the business needs, make sure our restoration meets what our business requires to keep in operation. So we've had to increase that service a little bit. Now, while we love to say BCDR, business continuity disaster recovery, is the last line of defense, the reality is that cybersecurity insurance is becoming the last line of defense because we know the bad actors are attacking those BCDR solutions and trying to take that away from you, that ability to restore away from you. Now, cyber insurance covers much more than just, extortion or ransom, but at the end of the day, it's what most or many businesses are falling on when they find out that they're breached. Now, from here, we're going to talk about some specific technologies. And the goal with this piece is just to give you some awareness on it, not to try and say you need any of this, but just as you're starting to have more and more conversations about cybersecurity, you start hearing these terms, especially in the IT space where we love to use acronyms. Hopefully it'll give you a little bit of awareness of what we're trying to do here. First and foremost is managed detection and response, constantly or commonly called MDR, right? If we think back 5 or 6 years ago, everybody here's heard of antivirus, right? It was the thing we put on our computers to stop viruses from coming in. It's a great program for a long time. Its downside is that it can only defend computers against things it knows about. So an attack would go out, the antivirus company would build a solution around protecting that specific attack and push it out. So it would only impact a few or a small number of systems. Well, bad actors got really wise to this and said, well, we're just going to change that footprint or that fingerprint every single time it launches so that the antivirus systems can't identify it. So we had to create a new software to stop not only those known threats, but also unknown threats or suspicious activity. And that was called endpoint detection and response, commonly called EDR, right? Again, a huge improvement in PC or endpoint protection, really helped improve the game and stop a lot of the crypto locker style viruses that came out there. And in that case, we also decided, hey, what else we need? We need the people and process behind this technology to make sure that it's monitored 24/7, that we're responding to issues if they do arrive. So we've increased that solution by adding a security operations center and calling it managed detection and response. The real difference between MDR and EDR is just that visibility 24/7, making sure somebody's there to respond. Next is DNS and web filtering. We touched on this when we were talking about the stack, how it backs me up from my security awareness training. It's an older technology. It gets used a lot and people don't think about it, but it's one of my favorites, right? If we go to Google as an example, our system is going to say, that's a good site, that's a good payload, go to work, search away, right? But let's say we go to Google with 7 O's on accident, our O gets stuck, and that's a bad site. Our system may not know about that out of the gate, but as that payload comes back in that's malicious, it's going to stop that payload from getting to our system and infecting our actual our computer, right? So really effective technology. It doesn't know about everything, but it blocks a lot of those malicious sites to make sure we don't access things we're not supposed to access. The next one is, again, one of the more impactful solutions that most providers offer or most businesses want to use today, and it's security awareness training. And typically has 2 pieces to it: education and testing. The education is typically on a quarterly basis. The testing is typically on a monthly basis, but your mileage may vary based on your company's needs and what they're trying to solve. But at the end of the day, we're trying to teach about current threats that are out there and test to make sure that that training is being effective. And it's because we expect this type of message, but again, we're getting these type of messages. Now, next is probably the IT person's favorite technology, SIM and SOC, and that stands for Security Information and Event Management and a Security Operations Center. So this is a relatively larger set of technology, and the goal here is to say we have all these things on our networks. We're using SaaS applications, we have workstations, servers, firewalls, we have all these things out there, and they all have logs and events that happen on them. And if we don't set them up properly, we don't always know what's going on. So let's take all of those pieces of information and send it to a central repository. This does 2 things for us. Number one, it helps us correlate. So if something's going on a firewall and on a workstation, it can combine those 2 together and say, we have a bigger problem than we thought. It also preserves all that information if we were to have an incident or a breach, and where it can say what data was accessed and did any data leave the organization? Because we know bad actors, when they get on the firewall and servers, they start deleting logs because they don't want you to know specifically what was taken. It allows them to increase that potential that you got the good data and that it's more valuable to you for them to not release that to the public. If we look at this in a real world example, we have a small business, let's just say 25 users, 5 servers, and a few different sites, maybe a couple different SaaS applications. The reason we add the SOC, the Security Operations Center, that 24/7 eyes that manage and respond to alerts, is because just that small environment creates about 430 events per second. And SIM solutions are wonderful, but they're also, it takes a lot of configuration and time to make sure they're effective and they're seeing all the new alerts that are coming in. So we have to have that SOC maintain those solutions constantly. Now, how they alert, if we think about a user logging in from LA to Microsoft 365 as an example, no surprise there, it happens all the time. It's just going to log that event so we have it for historical purposes. But let's say at the same time, or a few minutes later, the same username logged into Microsoft 365 from the UK. The system, this is where that correlation comes in, because it's going to say, hey, that can't happen. We can't have the same username logging into the same system from different geographic locations. Let's go ahead and notify the SOC that an impossible travel occurred. Let's change the password, disable the account, and notify the user. The best part about this is this happens within minutes versus 200 days, which is unfortunately how we normally find out. And if we think a little bit about how we normally react to mistakes, or at least how we used to react to mistakes, too often we've had small businesses, somebody clicks a link and nothing happens. And so they tell themselves, "Whew, I dodged the bullet there," but they don't understand that the bad actor had gotten access and is just taking their time. 200 days later, the ransom request comes in, but you can't put the pieces together to know that Jim clicked the link to let the bad actor in for 200 days. If we leverage something like a SIM and SOC, we can significantly reduce that time they're in the environment, which does 2 things. It limits the amount of data that they can access in that time, and significantly lowers the payout potential that we might have to pay to reverse a ransomware or pay for an extortion. Now, back to probably the savior technology, right? What we use whenever something bad happens. And this isn't just a cybersecurity solution. Business continuity and disaster recovery was originally developed in case things fail, right? If we have equipment that fails, if we have a fire, if we have a tornado, if we have something that destroys the environment. It also plays in cybersecurity because oftentimes data is deleted, modified, or destroyed completely. So we follow a BCDR solution that we often call 3-2-1. 3 copies of your data on 2 different medias, one being far away. Now, 15 years ago, right, that one being far away was a pretty big challenge. In today's world, it's just a click of a button, you find the repository and you send it off-site, but still something we want to do because we still have those disaster scenarios in our regions. Depending on which region you live in, your disaster scenario may be different. But at the end of the day, we got to make sure we have our data somewhere else far away so that if something happens to the production data and that local data, right, we can recover. And even if you're using a fully SaaS-based solution, right, you're 100% Microsoft 365, maybe a couple other SaaS applications, we still want to consider this solution because a lot of those SaaS-based services don't follow this. It's not, they're guaranteeing the environment, not the restoration of your data. So we want to make sure we're still covering that with our own process. We add the plus in here because without proper configuration, you could have 10-2-1 or 10-5-1. And if the bad actors can access that data and delete it, you can still be at risk. Now, how this looks in the real world, right? We have our production, our local, and our offsite backup. First things first, that geographic distance, which is super easy today, something we don't even typically have to talk about. We just have to kind of remind people about. From there, we have to think about what happens if solutions grow, whether it's in the SaaS world or whether it's in the local side, right? We want to make sure that we replicate that SaaS or local data to our local backup and our offsite backup so that we can restore it if we ever needed it. What if there's a breach on the network, right? That's the biggest thing we're typically in fear of. If they can delete our production data and delete our local and offsite backup data, we really have a challenge. Because we know even if we pay the ransom, on average, around 76% of data can actually be recovered because some files just don't handle that encryption, decryption process very well. So we want to make sure that we never have to resort to paying the bad actors to recover data. But we'll leverage something called immutable storage, which just means it can't be deleted. Even if they got on the system, they would not be able to delete that backup data so that the team could restore the information when you needed it. Last but not least, a topic that doesn't get enough love, and that's the performance of the restoration. Oftentimes we ask the question, how long can you handle being down? And a business owner or a business leader may say, I can handle 8 hours, I can handle 24 hours, given your number based on your business. And we design the solution around that. But too often we find out at the end that it's just not enough, or that it took 8 hours to figure out what the problem was, and then we started the restoration. So we're at 16 hours. Making sure we understand, again, the business continuity disaster recovery plan completely follows what your business needs specifically are so that we're designing this for the performance that you actually need. So that's kind of the people and technology, or the technology and process side. The last real piece to talk on here is people skills. And we don't talk about this a lot. We're so focused on the technology in today's world that we don't really say, well, what are we looking for in IT professionals? And while the support side is still going to be there for a long time, even though a lot of the solutions are starting to become self-healing or trying to become self-healing, we know that we need our IT professionals to know 3 things going forward, specifically 2024 and going into 2025. Number one is cybersecurity. And what we're going to say that is how do we secure data? How do we make sure that data is safe so that we don't put our teams, our business, our clients, and our vendors at risk? How do we protect it so we not only have our data, lost to the world, but we're also not patient zero for somebody else's infection? How do we manage data protection? Which in the simple terms means how do we make sure we can recover our data and our information if something were to happen? And again, this doesn't have to be a cyber attack. This could be in a disaster situation. It could be other things as well. Equipment failure, very simple solutions. How do we make sure we can recover our environments? We have to understand how to do that very, very well so we can make sure businesses stay open. And last is the buzzword of the year, right? AI implementation. How do we help businesses leverage AI to increase capacity and reduce their response times? Lots of solutions are using AI, lots of businesses are using AI, but make sure you're using it in a safe and healthy way for your business is the most critical thing. So starting to wrap this up, right, we'll typically say there's 6 core cybersecurity requirements, and we only put this slide up here because we're often asked, what should I do? And we'll say, hey, first thing you need to do is do an assessment, right? We need to understand your business and your risks so we can craft a solution that meets your needs. But if we're just going to say, I need to implement solutions, we typically say these 6. First, we need an incident response plan, because what typically happens on a bad day when you either have a breach, an incident, or a disaster is we don't know what to do, so we start trying to fix things. And that causes a lot of challenges in different environments. We could be destroying forensic evidence. We could be doing it incorrectly. We could be causing more harm to the environment. So we need a step-by-step set of instructions so we know what to do and when to do it. The next 5 are all technologies, right? Putting a managed detection and response solution on a PC so that it can find known and unknown threats and have somebody watching it 24/7 to react if something happens. Multi-factor authentication and security awareness training are the 2 cheapest things we can do to protect an environment. Making sure you are who you say you are and that you're very skeptical is the end goal in both those solutions. SIM and SOC is going to give us that visibility between the attack and the ransom request. So we can start seeing things that happen in the organization and we can respond to them much, much faster. And then that BCDR solution, making sure it actually meets our business needs. So we're always in charge of our recovery. Now, little exercise here, right? If we think of that bad actor attacking with a fake email attack, right? Our security awareness is going to kick in and we're going to delete the message right away. If we think of a password theft, and one way to think about this is if you do password reuse, meaning I use the same password for Netflix as I use for LinkedIn, as I use for my business account. If any of them are breached, all of them are breached. So oftentimes we'll tell people, assume your password is breached and then act accordingly, right? And so we want to leverage things like multi-factor authentication. So if our password is ever leaked for one reason or another, we always can have that layer of backup, making sure that they won't have that MFA information to access your environment. General exploits, and these are going to be vulnerabilities in hardware and software that's out in the world, right? SIM and SOC is going to help us notify if somebody takes advantage of those exploits, and good patching. And I would also say retirement of old equipment are the things we can do to minimize those. Data ransom is going to be protected with your BCDR. So anytime something's encrypted on your environment, you can restore it yourself and you never turn that over to the bad actor. All right, so wrapping it up. If we think about the 3 things that we always want to talk about, one is that everyone's a target. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Everyone's a target. A lot of times small businesses don't put the solutions in place that they need, and it makes them more susceptible to risk. Building that layered defense is going to make sure that technology backs up technology, and we don't have to rely on people to understand when they're at risk. And last is understanding your risk, doing an assessment to make sure you know what your specific business risks are. And that's it. Sorry about that, Taylor. I'll turn it back over to you, or Trace.
Yeah, absolutely. I can get my video to come on here. Yeah, thank you for that, Jim. Trace, while we're giving Jim a second here, I did have one question that came in specifically around AI and just how AI is a cybersecurity risk. As much as I would love to pretend to be an expert on AI from the marketing side of things, can either of y'all kind of answer that question on how, using ChatGPT for business or an integration on a platform might be posing a potential cybersecurity risk? I guess what you kind of do about it to mitigate some of those things.
Trace, you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, look, I've really spent a lot of time in my career, in boardrooms, especially with investors looking at IT businesses. And so a lot of the way I think about all of this is from that sort of business aspect. If I'm in a room of investors, how am I explaining to them the risk? How am I explaining to them why, yes, these things are good, but also these things are bad, right? And I think with AI specifically, we want to never attribute to malice what we can attribute to incompetence, right? And I think that goes for any sort of internal threat. A lot of times these are mistakes, and we'll plug AI in, or we get sold on this cool application. And, being in the MSP space, we're always getting vendors calling us with some new AI tool that's going to sort of automatically do things for us, right? That we don't want to have to do manually. And so there's really two approaches, I think, when we're looking at AI. One, I think it's a business risk in general. A lot of times we've seen so many times where someone deploys an AI chatbot, and that chatbot gets manipulated to give someone a discount, right? Or give them a free service, or just in general, right? That these chatbots can be manipulated. We see it happening on the platform formerly known as Twitter, right? Where people are engaging with these chatbots, and then those chatbots are then either breaking or turning around or breaching data, right? And I think that's where the cyber mindset has to be around. If you're going to bring in an AI application, there really has to be a good vendor assessment. A lot of frameworks are built and they require a vendor assessment, right? If you have PCI, if you have HIPAA, if you have SOC. And so that's the way I would approach any AI tool, is do a full vendor assessment. Because what happens is if you don't have the right protection in place, and we call that the Swiss cheese approach. Jim mentioned the layers, right? And if you have a bunch of Swiss cheese, those holes eventually stop lining up, and you end up with one solid barrier. And I think when you approach AI or any vendor with that, right? Because if you deploy AI out of the box, you don't have a good SOC in place, you don't have these things in place to sort of keep an eye what's going on with your data, and someone manipulates that AI, even if it's just prompt engineering, you may have a breach that you don't really know about. That AI is just engaging in chat. That AI is giving patient data, especially in healthcare, right? When you want to chat, you want someone who's able to, we have so many calls come in, and we worked with a pharmacy, and they say most of the time people just want to know when their prescription is ready. There's so many things you have to check on, especially if you want to be HIPAA and PCI compliant before you can even give that data out, right? So you have to make sure that all of those things are in place before you look at deploying something like AI from a business risk and from a cyber risk perspective.
No, that's a great point. And I'd throw in there that AI is a big term, right? When we say AI, we think of the Chat GPTs, we think of the Geminis. When we think of what a lot of vendors are trying to integrate into their solutions. And at the end of the day, they're just trying to speed things up, right? Increase automation, increase intelligence. And we just got to understand that that can come with vulnerabilities, right? If it can access your data, it can put that data at risk. And there may be new challenges out there with new applications that come in that we just have to protect against.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I haven't had any more questions come through. So just as we wrap up here, if you're concerned about the current stance of your own cybersecurity internally, In-Telecom is here, and we'd love to do a little risk assessment, just kind of give you an idea of where you're at, where you've got gaps in your current in your Swiss cheese, as Trace put it. And we can help you identify that. If you scan the QR code that's on your screen, and take you to a little form and get you in touch with our solutions architects, and just get a quick assessment for you and let you get a better understanding of where you're at and where you likely need to go. With that, I will leave it to you and Trace. Anything further, guys? Or Jim, I certainly appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. All right, y'all. Well, thank you very much, and we will see you on the next one.